As Israel-Iran tensions escalate, the Middle East is seemingly on the brink of a war. Multiple lives have been lost and hundreds are wounded on both the sides. We are getting you this special ground report from Tel Aviv. Middle East is on the brink of a war. Like I said, multiple people have lost their lives. Hundreds have been wounded, both in Israel as well as Iran. And there is no end in sight for this entire conflict.
And how United States militarily supported Israel in its aggression. We are monitoring the situation. We have many evidence in this regard, showing how U.S. forces helped Israeli regime.
Meanwhile, what is the scale of destruction, especially in Israel? My colleague Arjun Mahindran, he gets us this report on the basis of the Maxa satellite images. Take a look.
Well, we have here for you exclusive Maxa satellite imagery that details, in fact, the before, as you see, and the after of Israeli strikes across Iran's nuclear infrastructure. So first up, we have the Isfahan nuclear site. It's located around 440 kilometers south of capital Tehran. You can see the damage dealt to overhead structures on the left-hand side. According to the IAEA, 4 structures have been damaged in this nuclear facility. Once again, it's very important to Tehran. Why? Because the centrifuge process, which essentially converts uranium into a gaseous form so it can be enriched, actually happens at this facility. Now, moving on, second up, we have the Natanz nuclear facility. It's in fact considered Iran's main center for enrichment of uranium. The zoomed in shot right there, the after shots, in fact, show you the damage dealt right there to the overhead facilities inside the Natanz nuclear complex. Now, these were not only the 2 facilities that were in fact targeted by Israel in its strikes on Tehran on the intervening night, in fact, of Thursday and Friday. It also targeted the nuclear facility at Piran Sheher and the IRGC Ghadir site. The visuals of attack you see right there on your screens, and the scope of attacks as well, viewers.
Meanwhile, tension is continuing to simmer in the west of Asia, even after 3 days of relentless attacks and counterattacks. Multiple lives have been lost on both the sides, that is Israel and Iran. Take a look at this report.
The Israeli air raid siren in my residential neighborhood on the outskirts of Tel Aviv woke me at 3 in the morning. This has happened on many nights during the last 20 months of missile attacks from Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Houthis in Yemen. I, like many Israelis, have stopped running to the public bomb shelters outside my apartment. We have been lulled into a sense of security, knowing that the Israeli Iron Dome defensive system successfully intercepts the vast majority of incoming missiles. But last night was different. Soon after the alarm was finished near the windows that were blown off of the wall in front of my house, I ran to the nearest bomb shelter, crowded together with many of my frightened and anxious neighbors, including children and the elderly. Only after receiving the all-clear signal from Israel's Home Front Command did I venture outside to see the damage which the latest Iranian missile attack had caused. Literally around the corner from my home, a tall apartment building had suffered a direct hit from the Iranian missile. One side of the building had fallen, and the shock blasts caused massive damage to about 50 buildings in the vicinity. Dazed residents roamed the streets strewn with broken cement and glass. Hundreds of rescue and ambulance crews searched for wounded survivors under the rubble. The numbers so far are grim. Over 200 wounded, 6 killed, and 20 still missing. And this is in addition to another Iranian missile attack last night which hit a northern Arab Israeli city, killing 4 Arab Muslim women. The Iranians claim that they are launching hypersonic missiles which travel so quickly that the Israeli Iron Dome doesn't have the time to intercept them. But the Israeli military denies this claim, saying that these Iranian missiles are the same standard ballistic missiles used in previous Iranian attacks in April and October 2024. But whatever the explanation for the failure of Israeli defenses to prevent so much death and destruction during the last 2 days, the results are terrifying. And there is no end in sight to this war of Israeli attacks and Iranian counterattacks. Unfortunately, as the Israeli defense minister said, if Iran continues targeting Israeli civilians, Tehran will burn. This is Ricky Rosen reporting from the area of Tel Aviv.
All right, we'll try and make sense of what is transpiring in both the countries, Israel and Iran, and try and find answers to what the ramifications it might have for the rest of the Middle East as well as the rest of the world. In fact, I'm currently joined from Lynchburg, Virginia. James Bowden, Arab and Middle East expert. I also have Daniel Silverberg joining from Washington, D.C. He's a Middle East expert, adjunct fellow at Center for New American Security. I also have Kamran Bukhari from Virginia in the United States of America, geopolitical intelligence analysis specialist. Gentlemen, welcome to NDTV. When we talk about the geopolitical strategy and diplomacy, James Bowden, how likely is it that this new escalation between Israel and Iran, it could spiral into a full-scale regional war?
I really don't see a great likelihood for that happening. And the majority of the reason why is that a lot of the countries in the region are supporting Israel's strikes against Iran. And so they are going to continue to watch this from the sidelines. Iran also has no great benefit to get out of attacking U.S. targets right now. In fact, that would escalate, that would truly cause an escalation that would injure them. So I really don't see a great cause for concern that this is going to generate into a larger conflagration unless, at worst, the Iranians decide to hit targets inside Saudi Arabia or along the Persian Gulf. But again, I think that as we have watched their limited capacity, they have not put up jet fighters. They have just simply been responding with ballistic missiles. And from what I've heard and seen, fewer and fewer missiles on each strike sortie. So it doesn't appear that they have the capacity to withstand a larger escalation.
Okay. Daniel Silverberg, from whatever the latest that we are getting at this moment is that Iran is still firing back. What's the end game here for Tehran? Is it deterrence? Is it distraction or domestic control? What do you think it is?
Well, first, it's extraordinary what Israel has accomplished in a short time. These strikes demonstrated extraordinary capability, even more than what we saw in the April attacks last year. We saw Israel not only be able to hit with great precision the nuclear infrastructure of Iran, but also go after specific leaders who were part of the program. But it's a great question of, okay, what happens now? Once the initial euphoria subsides and it looks like we're entering into a far more protracted battle, what does Tel Aviv want out of this? What does Tehran want out of this? Well, for Tehran, they want to make sure that the regime remains intact. And the regime has come under more pressure in the last 72 hours than probably in the last 40 years of its existence. And so its number one objective is to make sure that the regime survives. How can they do that? Well, either by demonstrating military capability that, per my colleague's comment just now, I agree with. I don't think Iran has at the moment. They are not in a position to be striking U.S. or Saudi targets or expanding this war. So what can they non-militarily do? Well, one is what Donald Trump wants them to do, to come to the table and reach a deal. That is highly unlikely at the moment, given the degree of national pride and their own internal politics.
Right. Kamran Bukhari, give us a sense of where does Iran stand at this particular moment? Because in this particular conflict, Israel It is technically advanced. It has an upper hand, especially with the kind of support that it gets from the United States. What about Iran? Where does it stand at this moment?
Well, thank you, Sama. I tend to agree with my co-panelists. If you look at the imperatives and constraints of Iran, Dan just made a good point about regime preservation being the foremost imperative of the Islamic Republic. The question is, how do you achieve it? How do you sustain regime preservation under the current conditions? Well, you don't have military options. So you need to find an off-ramp, engineer, your way away from the fighting back to the negotiating table that the Trump White House is saying. In fact, the president just put on social media that, the war may come to an end soon, and there are lots of negotiations behind the scenes going on. So they have to find a way to do that without losing face. Without losing credibility. That's been pretty shot. I mean, if you have the Israeli Air Force essentially operating not only in Iranian airspace, but also Israeli intelligence operating on the ground, then that that hurts substantially the Islamic Republic's credibility in the eyes of its own people. So they need to move away from this. This is why I think their counterstrikes, their retaliatory strikes, though still exposing Iranian weakness, because they're nothing compared to what Israel is capable of mounting. But it's sort of trying to set the stage for, how do we not look like we're completely capitulating? So, and there was a statement from the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson yesterday, I believe, saying that essentially not vehemently rejecting any diplomacy. It's just that we can't do it right now, which means that we need to create the conditions. So there are conversations behind the scenes. There's the retaliatory strikes, but ultimately they have to sort of come back to the table and compromise in a way that they get to the other side of this without losing domestic stability. And that's a hard one.
Yeah, it is a hard one. But what is happening right now is, and especially in context of the United States, we heard Marco Rubio earlier, in fact yesterday, say that, look, we don't have anything to do with the strikes that are happening in Iran. It is in isolation. Israel is taking these actions against Iran. At the same time, Iran, it is claiming that the United States is actively backing Israel's military action. What I want to understand from you, Kamran Bukhari, is this political bluster, or is it a prelude to dragging Washington into this conflict?
So look, it's no secret that U.S. and Israeli interests aren't always aligned.
Yeah.
And they're naturally, that way, because the U.S. is looking at it from a different angle. The viewfinder from Israel is very different. They live in the region. The Israelis, Americans don't. And so obviously there's something that the Israelis would want the United States, or steer this in a way that benefits them. But at the end of the day, as far as the White House is concerned, Donald Trump has told his supporters, look, I'm against wars, and forever wars, to use his language. And I'm going to establish peace, whether it's in Ukraine or the Middle East. And in fact, he claims that he can stop conflicts from even beginning. But now we have a situation where there is a conflict. So I think that the president wants to sort of take this and say, okay, is this pressure that the Israelis have put on to the Iranians sufficient for them to come back to the table? That's the question that they're trying to ask in the back channels. Israel, on the other hand, wants to see that, hey, whatever happens, kinetic action plus diplomacy, when the dust settles, will Iran have a path to nuclearization? And I think that's where the U.S. and Israeli, there's a convergence. The question is how to get there, and I think that's where there's some subtle disagreement.
I also want to focus on the U.S. factor here. As Donald Trump, he has weighed in. He has made a couple of statements. Daniel Silverberg, can Washington be a neutral broker anymore? Because especially with its deep ties to Israel and Trump's own legacy in the region.
Fundamentally, there is no more important actor here than the United States. And this question has come up not just right now, but if you look at every major conflict over the last 2 decades, people have asked, well, can the U.S., which is so close to Israel, be an honest broker? And in some ways, I would argue the question almost doesn't matter here. The real question is, will President Trump formally join the hostilities? And as my colleague mentioned, he is being pushed pretty hard by both the Israelis and by hawks inside Washington to deploy U.S. capabilities to go after the underground facilities. Israel was able to attack Natanz. They were able to go after various nuclear sites around the country. But Fordow is the nuclear gem for Iran. That is a hardened target, deep underground in a mountain facility next to the holy city of Qom. And Israel likely can attack on its own. So they are pressuring Trump to get into the fight. And Trump is facing a pitched political battle within the GOP on what to do. There's the one side of the MAGA universe saying, we elected you to end wars. Don't do it. Don't get involved. And the hawks inside the party, the more traditional voices who are saying, this is the moment. If you want to achieve peace, the way to do it is by striking Iran's underground facilities, by getting involved directly. So the main way that the United States could have a voice is either if they get involved militarily, or if Trump does what I really think he wants to do and comes to the table and tries to work a deal with Iran to put the nuclear program back in a box.
Right. Whether that happens or not, we'll still have to wait and watch, because this is a developing situation and it is getting out of control at the moment as we speak. James Bowden, another factor that I want to focus on is the Hezbollah. Does Hezbollah now have a green light to open another front in the north?
I don't think they have the capacity. I mean, they were trounced, to use a really high academic word, back in, I believe it was October. They are significantly hampered in their capabilities. Not only were they hit heavy in October with the Patriot attack, but we have also watched Syria engage in regular interceptions and interdictions of weapons that are being sent to them and cached, along the Lebanese-Syrian border and also in Iraq. And so Hezbollah is not in a position to assist them. And that has been one of the reasons why I think Israel took the moment when they had it, because Iran lost the Shia crescent, their arms in which they could strike at Israel. So I think at this point, Hezbollah is rather irrelevant to the conversation.
Right. Kamran Bukhari, one final word from you. What is the likeliest scenario in the next 72 hours? Is it de-escalation? Is it going to be further retaliation? Or is there going to be regional ignition now?
Well, that's a tough one. So let me try to answer it. Look, I think if based on everything that Jim, myself, and Dan have said, the White House is trying to steer this towards some sort of, back to the table, let's discuss, as opposed to having the fighting going on. In other words, cessation of hostilities. That could happen. But that said, given the imperatives of different actors here, Israel on one place, US, and then Iran, which is at the receiving end of one of the worst crises that has ever faced since the founding of the Islamic Republic, we have a situation where things can get out of hand. Once the shooting starts, and where the kinetic battle space has a logic of its own, unintended consequences emerge. One actor takes a certain step that forces the other actor to do another thing, and then things get out of hand and you're up that escalatory ladder pretty high and pretty quick. So it's really difficult to say. My hope is that there's a cessation of hostilities and this doesn't get worse. But what you want and what you can have are two separate things. So I guess I'll leave it there.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your views. It is indeed a developing situation, a very, very delicate situation. as far as this entire conflict is concerned. How is it going to play out in the next couple of days? We'll only have to wait and watch.